Welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. I'm Christine, and today we hear from a veteran homeschooling mum. She's also a very dear friend. In fact, that's how we met, through our homeschooling. She and her husband Michael homeschooled their 3 children from preschool all the way through to almost the end of high school. She tells us how and why they made their choices during their homeschooling years. And amongst the usual gems of homeschooling wisdom that she speaks of, there were a couple of interesting approaches that I had not considered. Also, she tells of homeschooling a dyslexic child, how they knew, what they did, and the outcome for everyone. This segment should provide encouragement for parents looking for advice. And lastly, Helen speaks of the strong focus on sport in their family and how they initiated not only many sporting opportunities for the homeschool community, but also cultural and artistic activities. How would you describe your homeschooling curriculum and approach?
Our approach was very fluid. We weren't unschoolers, but we definitely weren't on the scholastical academic end either. We were probably a little to the left, I would say. Each year we would start off by going, okay, what do you want to learn? What don't you want to learn? There were a lot of those. And then there was, what should you learn? And it was always interesting. They always picked the things that they probably said they didn't want to learn, but they knew they should learn. So that would kind of then morph back into the curriculum that we had. We did have a lot of curriculum, which we didn't use. We always did 2 maths books because I'm maths orientated. And I always know that even in school, if you go to one school, you won't necessarily be taught the same thing as another school. So I always wanted to have 2 books so that one book would pick up what the other one maybe wasn't teaching you. We always did reading, we always did writing, and we always did Bible. And that was the foundation of our curriculum.
I'm interested when you say you used 2 maths books. I didn't realise you did that. Did you choose like one New Zealand curriculum and say one that was American or Australian? How did you choose those?
One was Australian, not because it was Australian, just because I liked the math that was in it. And the other one was a New Zealand curriculum. But once again, it wasn't because it was New Zealand. It was just that it was a different approach to maths. Don't ask me what those curriculums were because it's been way too long.
All right, I won't. So you started off each year with what you needed to do and then formed your curriculum needs around that rather than just, say, buying a text or a box set and then fitting in with what that required of you. So that's, I guess, like your own family needs.
That's right. We came to the conclusion that we really liked doing unit studies. So I had a few unit study books. When I started out homeschooling, I bought huge amounts of curriculum and books and whatever. And to be perfectly honest, probably used 1/10 of them.
Wow, okay.
Because we were very hands-on. Also, we were a play centre family, and I had done quite a lot of early childhood education through play centre. And one thing that always stuck with me was Einstein's quote about experience is knowledge and everything else is information. So I suppose that also very much influenced the way we home educated. We did lots of hands-on learning. We obviously sat around the table at 9 o'clock. We would come. It didn't matter if you're in your pyjamas, didn't matter whatever. 9 to 12 was our time to do written work, maths, English, Bible, reading. And reading was reading to yourself and reading out aloud and me reading to them. Then it was very much hands-on stuff as well. Lots of Lego, as I think, like that whole spatial awareness. We did a lot, as I said, unit studies, chemistry, kitchen chemistry, all those kind of things.
At what point did you and your husband know that you were going to be carrying on through the play centre approach and straight into homeschooling?
Because we always had lots of play things at home, somebody said to me once, "Oh, you're going to home educate your children." I went, "No, never going to go to school." And then we started looking around at schools. And that was probably when our family philosophy came to the fore. We decided that we wanted to be the people influencing and moulding our children. We didn't want the teachers and we didn't want their peers. So we came to the conclusion that she wasn't going to go to school at 5, and so we put it off till 6. And the school that I then chose didn't have a place for us, so that was an easy out. And then they phoned us and said, "Oh, you've got a place." And we said, "Oh, actually, no, thank you." And so our homeschooling journey began.
And you never looked back?
Never looked back.
So how long ago was that? I get the impression that way back then there wouldn't have been that many homeschooling families in your network, am I right?
Correct. There was a homeschooling person in our play centre group, but really didn't know much about homeschooling. It was really just didn't want them to go to school. We wanted to be the people who were their main people in their lives.
Let's move on to what were the most important things to you and your husband over your homeschooling years. You've already said how you had bookwork done in the morning and what that comprised of, but when it came to what you wanted them to learn and what you wanted to teach them, and even going into like your Bible lessons, what was it that was your foundation?
Number one was character, values, and then the other thing was obviously they knew how to read, write and talk to people, and the ability to know where to access information, because once they could do that, the world was their oyster, really.
Yes, you're so right. To know how to do your own research means that forever after you can keep self-educating, never ends.
That's right. Even from a very early age, we had books, we had toys, we had educational equipment around. So if anything ever came up, they knew where they could access it. And back in the day, when we started, the internet wasn't really something that you used a lot of. And resources out there were people. We we didn't have lots of money, so what we would do is we'd get 2 or 3 other families together, and I would find somebody who was passionate about the subject, like music or art history or art or science or whatever, and we would do that for a term, and we would combine our resources and pay them to do something within their field. And it was really interesting how if you're really passionate about a subject, that's going to come out in the children, and the children get excited about it as well, except French.
Tell me about French, Helen.
I always wanted them to learn a language and to learn music. So we did French probably for 7-8 years in total. We did a lot of hands-on French. But it was interesting talking to one of my children. They said they didn't do enough of it. They would go to tutor maybe once, twice a week, but they needed to do more of it. And so therefore it didn't really happen for them. Also, the dog didn't help. My children didn't like dogs, and so there was a dog at so they were anti-French because of the dog, I think.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, looking back now, hindsight's always clear, isn't it? Would you have changed the French tutor on account of the dog, or?
I probably should have, but would it have made any difference to them being able to speak French? No.
So do you think that they just didn't really learn to love it, to want to study it, or they didn't actually go to the tutor or study it enough at home? What made it not work?
The first few tutors were great, and they did very practical things like cooking and going out and all of that kind of thing. So they learnt words and that, but that whole conversational French, which I think you need to be doing on a very regular basis 3-4 times a week, didn't happen because I don't speak French, and as much as you can sit and do book work, it didn't happen for us. But we tried. That's right. And at least they know now that they don't like French.
And there must be something that would still be familiar to them when they come across it. They may not think they know very much, but deep down in there...
It makes for a good story.
It makes for a good story. And I guess something for people trying to figure out what to do with languages now, to learn from experience such as yours and your children's.
Well, now of course you can go on the internet and you can find somebody who wants to learn English, so you can actually go on and they speak for half an hour and then you speak for half an hour in English, so that you can do that, which would have been very helpful back in the day.
I mean, I do agree, Helen, that to learn a language is important, especially down in New Zealand. We're so far away from the rest of the world, whereas if you're up in Europe and in England, it's quite common to speak at least one or have enough understanding of another one, because your life often means that you're moving around. But in New Zealand, we're so isolated, we don't often tend to. You mentioned that you wanted the children to learn French. Do you think that was maybe some of the issues? You wanted it, they didn't?
Absolutely. I definitely wanted them to learn a language because I think it just broadens your horizons. I don't know that it would have made any difference if it had been a different language. Yeah, it's just a good opportunity. And they started quite young, but I think like when you're at home, you speak a language, and then if you go to school, you're immersed in it in a different language. Like if you came from a French background, you'd be teaching your children, you'd be conversing with them all the time in French, and then you go to school and they're talking constantly in English, so that immersion would definitely help. From my experience, from my children that weren't interested in being particularly academic.
And yet they still were required to learn something that they might not have seen the reason for, and I think that is of value in itself. Because I do agree that it's important to learn a language. It does develop a part of the brain that wouldn't otherwise be stretched. And they would always know from there on what it actually entails to learn a language. And to even have some kind of compassion towards those who come here.
Exactly.
Like I know you have a lot of students in the home, knowing how they struggled with their French and seeing some of your students struggle with English, that have some measure of
empathy for them.
Empathy, good word here. What were some of the challenges that you had in your education over the years?
Sitting down at the table and doing their academic learning.
Because you didn't want to do it, or the children didn't want to do it?
Yeah, as I said, we weren't particularly scholastic, but they would get away with not doing it because also I was working, and probably that would be one of the things that I would cut back on so that I could be at the table with them more. I would always be on the side and not really overseeing what they were doing.
Can we talk about that a little bit more, because that is on the minds of a few families now as to what extent should they be picking up some part-time work to keep their own corporate careers or whatever going, or just simply to earn a little bit more money, but trying to get that balance right. So you now have your experience and you can look back and go, oh, well, maybe I did too much. How would you advise families to think about that?
I shouldn't have said I did too much. I think we did a lot of other things, and work was one of those other things. And the fact that the kids helped me in the business was a really good thing because they learnt some business skills. But the whole thing about we weren't academics, so we didn't, as I said, we did lots of other things. So perhaps I should have concentrated a bit more on English, because one of my children went to school just for 1 year in year 12 and found that wasn't quite up to scratch for English and maths and needed a bit of help. They were fine once they kind of got into the groove, but having that confidence when you first go into it, was that okay? It was good character learning, and they came out of it okay. They passed, but didn't really like school, so they came home to do year 13. I suppose I never thought that, but discussing it with them, that was kind of something that they felt we could have done more of. Whether they would have done more of if I'd sat with them is probably debatable as well. You know, we just never set ourselves up for that, whereas there are families who are very academic and they do quite in-depth curriculums. And also I feel that maybe the first one was different to the last child, whereas the last child probably had a little bit more self-direction and would actually go and seek out more work, whereas the first two didn't.
And that's just a difference in character, personality.
Yeah, so it's hard to say that I did too much, like just reflecting on it now, because as I said, it also showed the children what work is, what work ethic is, and what it was to be in a business and helping with the business. And so, that was a whole different life skill that they learned. And the good thing was that it went on to the three of them forming their own little business. Yeah.
So that would have been then a natural outcome, potentially, of experience at home, moving straight into that.
Coming up with ideas of how they could make some money, importing, all that kind of thing. So I suppose that took the place of maybe doing a bit more English or a bit more maths, even though I feel they did plenty of maths.
Can you talk about the educational challenges that were in your family, please?
Because of Play Centre, my philosophy was not to really look at anything that was a little bit different until the child was developed around the age of 7, Steiner and all of those. I like that philosophy. So at 7, I realised one of my children perhaps was not up to the reading and writing skills of their siblings. They had an older sibling and another sibling. So I had them tested at ProEd, which is a company that does lots of testing. And the results came back that they were severely dyslexic, that it would be unlikely that they would be able to read past the age of a 10-year-old, which meant that they wouldn't be able to function in society, because you need to be at a 10, 12-year-old level to be able to read road signs, to follow directions, to read information about signing off on things and things like that. Of course, we said that was rubbish, that everybody has the capability of learning. So we went off and found a teacher who could teach her, and it was one-on-one. We had to find the money to do that. But of course you do that. I mean, that's what you take on. And so we found a teacher who could help them with strategies on when it came to reading or writing or spelling, that they then knew what it was. For example, which drove me insane, they couldn't spell the word they. And so the strategy was, it's the why.
Because your child knew what the word the was and the letter Y
was. They could never put it together. And to this day, they will still write they 3 or 4 different ways. If you ask them to spell it out loud, it will be correct. But if you were up to ask them to write a sentence 2 or 3 times, it would be different every time, which is still quite interesting, but absolutely can read, write, and is well functioning in society. So never allow people to tell you what your children are capable of doing. And also with that, everybody has a disability. This particular child is the most creative person. We had several tutors, and we also found a program. At that stage, computers were just kind of coming in, and we had a disc that we got from the Dyslexic Society in England, and they did that every day, and it was a lot of rote learning, but it was fun rote learning. They did it 5 days a week, and they would learn that strategy, and then they'd move on to the next one, and that really helped. And then the next teacher we found, or in conjunction with that, was doing art and sewing and all of those kind of things. So it was kind of like all that side of the brain, and very good at maths. Couldn't do multiplication and division. And I remember going to an expert, and he said, don't worry, give her a calculator. And it was perfect, because they were able to do subtraction and addition, no problem. But the brain just did not allow for multiplication and division.
And nowadays, everyone's got an instant calculator in their phone anyway, so if you need it. And then I have to say too that even the modern students who don't have dyslexic challenges often aren't taught that skill anyway. Your child had a way to she had a solution to the problem, which meant that she wasn't going to be in any kind of deficit.
That's right. Everybody has a disability, and yours just happens to be this. They were never allowed to use it as a reason to get out of doing things. They still had to read aloud. They still had to do their maths. They still had to do their writing. Okay, there might have been a little bit of help given, but I always felt that it was good that if you told people up front, if you're in a situation where this could affect you, just tell people and they would make allowances. You can't not do something because of it, and you can't use it for that reason. But people are more willing to give you a little bit of leeway if they know these things.
If they know. But I can also see that you and Mike did not allow your child to hide behind that, and it could have been so very easy to want to protect. But how does that equip a child going on into life?
Well, it's interesting because now they'll laugh at themselves quite easily and go, oh, I can't do that, and I don't think they feel it as anything to be ashamed of. It is just what it is. And so everybody just laughs. All her friends know, and it's just part of it. Mm. One thing that did make me a bit sad, though, was when I learned about it, was that they would often go into a rage. And when you're dyslexic, the brain works differently. And what happens is they can only take so many instructions. And because she was so dyslexic, really, they could only take one instruction. Like if I said, go to your bedroom, make your bed, pick up your books, and put your clothes away, that there would be a brain explosion because there were just too many things to think about. And once we learnt they couldn't have that many instructions, that maybe 2 was the max, life became a lot easier.
So you couldn't change that because that's actually the way a brain is set up. So I'm thinking of when you took your child to be assessed, and that assessor told you and your husband that she wouldn't be able to have the reading age beyond 10. A diagnostic prophecy, if you like. How accurate was that?
Well, it wasn't particularly accurate for us because we didn't accept it, and we went out and found ways to develop their ability to read and write. Okay, they're never going to be, if they had wanted to go to university, they definitely would have been able to have a reader writer. But it also shaped what they wanted to do. They never wanted to go. I mean, they got offered a scholarship to a very prestigious university in America because of other skills that they had, but never was on the radar to go to university. Always loved children, and so that's the area that their skills were developed, and is now her career.
All right then, Helen. So let's say we've got a parent listening to this, and they have a young child and they know something isn't quite right, or they might be frustrated, but they're starting to listen and go, oh, I wonder if that could be my child. What advice would you give them?
I definitely think that age around 7, because by then they should definitely have certain milestones and they should be able to do certain things. So at that stage, you should know whether or not things are going accordingly, and you have a gut feel as a parent because you know your child better than anybody else in the world, and you should always go with your gut. And then you just do some research, and obviously, as I said, it was sad for us that we learned that it took 7 years for us to realise why they were having these tantrums, but other than that, it hadn't really affected them at all. I think you never say never. Because you've decided to home educate, you have options to go out and find solutions to anything that is going on in the home educating sphere. Even if you have a child who excels in something, then you go and find somebody, if they're beyond your capabilities, of being able to teach them further. So this was just that phase, but it was just along the dyslexic line, finding somebody who knew about dyslexia and was able to help.
And because I know your family so well, I can, with you, look back over the years and say that was so worth it, because you've got the most amazing, young adults, you and Mike now.
Well done to them, really.
So if you could time travel, Helen, what advice would you give you?
Not buy any curriculum to start with. Little ones don't need much. And then you can find your philosophy. As I said, our philosophy became maths books and unit studies, which were great for us. And then as they got older, then we used to have tutors and people like that. So that was really good. I don't know about the work situation. I would have always worked. Whether I would have taken on the business, our business, I don't know. But they learnt other things from that. And I asked Michael this question, and he said, not worry. He said, you worry that are you doing the right thing by your children? But we think our children are great, and that they've turned into well-functioning members of society, good people. And that was our number one thing.
Then you can say job well done.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that particularly brought up? What else have you got on your notes that might be
Well, sport obviously was a very important part, because Michael and I were quite sporty people, and so that's how we met, and our children were involved in sport virtually from the day they were born. We didn't have any sleep routines. They came with us and went everywhere, hence the fact that they didn't sleep through the night until they were like 5. So they had about 15 years of sleepless nights, but that was what we chose to do. Sport for us was very important because there's lots of different things you get out of sport. You get the shared memories as a family have been really important. There's been the team building that they get, learning to play and develop, and you're only as good as the weakest member of your team, and you want to lift them up to be the best that they can so that you can succeed. Being out there, being healthy, good for body, mind and spirit. It's socially good. I hate to say it, you get these people and go, oh, what about homeschoolers and their social interaction? Well, you get tired of answering that question, but, sport has been good for that. And it was good for funding, to be honest. You could say when we went for funding, oh, yes, these children needed to have all the sport equipment or that, so they can be socially equipped. So please give us some money.
And this was funding for what?
Well, it would be like, we did camps, and we went to Merck, and we went up to Shakespeare Lodge, and we'd get funding for uniforms and things like that.
Who did you approach for funding?
Well, we formed the society, and then it was just different funders out there. There's loads of funders out there. Throwing in this need to socialise was always a good one, which was rubbish, but
It's the ultimate leverage, wasn't it?
It was. You and I know it was hard to keep them at home. Well, for me anyway, my kids always wanted to be out and about. And also, sport brings you together with people who are like-minded, and that's important. So my children still have close friends and always will have those friends through sport.
So tell us about how your important priority for sporting for your family rippled out. I could do the telling because we were the lucky recipients of it, but tell the listeners how that was to the advantage of the homeschooling community. What did you do?
Well, I suppose that was one of the things when I said, we did lots of other things. We did it basically for ourselves, but we also did it for the community, because I always felt we were in a community, and therefore everybody had to be blessed for it, and you could tap people on the shoulder because you couldn't do it all yourself, right? So that was another blessing for everybody. I think that really came about because we were told we weren't allowed to play with school children, and once again that wasn't going to happen. Nobody's going to tell you you can't, right? So we formed the society, and from that we had ideas. What did the members of the society want to do? So we had sport, we had education, we had cultural events. We just had the time of our lives. And I have to say, it wasn't just for the children, it was also for the adults. It was a marvellous time. And that's one of the things my children say. They say, if they had gone to school, they wouldn't have had those experiences.
So let's list off some of those experiences so that people who are listening can go, oh, that's a good idea. We should organise that. So go back to the cultural experience. How would you do a little drop-down box with the cultural experience?
We had things like arts festivals. We started at a little church hall. I always wanted it to be families, and it was families having fun together. And so families would just do little skits. And we had some very talented musical families, which our family wasn't. But I always felt if you do something, you have to participate. So to this day, my children go, how could you have made us do that, Mum? But anyway, we do it. And so, like and then we'd have like a meal, a shared meal, and we'd have a choir, and we'd had somebody in charge of the choir, and then we had a homeschool teenager who was in charge of the dance, and she did several dance groups, and it just blossomed from there. And then we moved right up into hiring quite sophisticated equipment. We got some funding for that, and we had a whole production. We had somebody who came in and they actually filmed it for us. We had techno, so some of the boys and girls learned how to use the equipment for staging. We had people who were coming in and doing skits and drama, and once again the choirs, and of course there was always the homeschool families doing their thing, and on the side of it we would have art displays, and it was quite a big production.
I remember rightly, even the mothers had a dance.
They did. Yeah.
And what sporting opportunities did the homeschooling community have?
We were very fortunate in the fact that netball said, homeschool children could participate in their school competitions. So once that opened the door, basketball wasn't going to say no, and hockey wasn't going to say no, and all the other sports, because there had been a precedent set. So it just meant that our teams could participate in the local competitions. They couldn't then go through to the competitions that were national events, even though they had won. They weren't allowed, and that was fine. They could do it in reps or whatever if that's what they were doing. But they were able to succeed and to learn those basic skills, which were good for them.
And they had many opportunities through coming down to the YMCA each week. And you wouldn't need to have your husband as the manager. That was awfully convenient. But anyone could arrange to hire a YMCA or something similar, and then arrange coaches and instructions to come in.
And then once again that mushroomed, because we started off with one group, and then we had to move it into two groups, because I think at its heyday in the time we had like 80 children participating over the two groups, and so the younger children would come second. They would do the second class, but there was opportunities for them. I think upstairs we had robotics, and then downstairs we had arts and crafts, or it might have been drama or something downstairs, and then they'd swap over, or they could then go and do Kiwi sport. And so the whole afternoon was just spent doing all these different activities, and from that they had, if they wanted to be, they could play in teams and play in the local competitions,
which gave the children and the families opportunities to experience several things every Thursday.
That's right.
So it was convenient time-wise as well.
That's right. And then they started a homeschooling gym session just for the homeschoolers. So gymnastics, I think, was on a Tuesday for those people who want to do gymnastics.
So I guess homeschoolers don't really miss out on very much at all, if anything.
There's plenty of things out there. If you want something for your children, you just go out there and find it.
If it isn't there, go and do it yourself.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid. Tap people on the shoulder. Like, I can't sing to save myself, but we had so many talented musical people that, we tapped them on the shoulder and they did the choir. And then we had somebody else who was on the piano, and they had somebody who could do all that synthesizing things it was just amazing. We even had our own balls, didn't we?
Yes, that's right. Our homeschool balls. When the young adults, the young teens and the mid-teens would all go off and learn their ballroom dancing each week. They were good years. Helen, I'm so grateful for the time that you put aside, and you've got a twinkle in your eye actually as we've sat here and talked. It's been a good experience for you to pull memories out and talk us through, and I know the parents are going to be so grateful for your reminiscences.
Well, we had such a good time, didn't we?
Oh,
not only our children, but us.
Friendships that will be old ladies and still be friends. Oh, thank you, Helen. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.